I appreciate the update, sweetie, Ethan said with a casual smile as he tossed his sunglasses onto the coffee table and strolled into the living room. His fitted suit and brand new shoes, paired with the flashy luggage adorned with upscale labels, radiated the confidence of someone living out their fantasy. "Sarah, this is the life I've been missing," he announced, his voice dripping with excitement. "First class to Europe, opulent hotels. I couldn't resist." I started laughing, sound breaking free before I could stop it. "What's so funny?" he snapped, his confident demeanor faltering into irritation. Shaking my head, I replied, "Oh, Ethan," I couldn't hide the hint of a smirk. "You really have no idea. My name is Sarah, and I'm 34 years old. For the past 7 years, I've been married to a man who was the human embodiment of a red flag disguised as charm. I work in cybersecurity, and while my world revolves around logic and precision, Ethan was always the dreamer, the smooth talker, the one who painted grand pictures. Upstairs, I was asleep when it occurred. He must have crept down to my laptop just when he was certain I was unconscious. I had learned to watch out for possible frauds from my profession in cybersecurity, but I never imagined that I would need such abilities at home. Ethan accessed one of my credit cards on my laptop that evening. He took a couple shots with his phone, wrote down the information, then slithered back into bed as if nothing had occurred. As I was drinking my coffee the following morning, I realized that my phone was inundated with warnings. I discovered almost $50,000 in charges when I opened my banking app. Expensive watches, designer clothes, and first-class tickets to Paris. As the parts came together, I felt sick to my stomach. This was Ethan's doing. He was, of course. But I grinned rather than freaked out. It wasn't a personal account that he had used. The fictitious credit card was connected to a training program I administer at work. It is intended to instruct businesses on how to identify and handle fraud. Each transaction sets up an automated warning that is sent directly to the relevant authorities. Ethan was unaware that he had just been the subject of a case study. That same morning, I gave my lawyer Chloe a call. I assured her, "You won't believe this," and went into great detail. She laughed without even trying to contain it. In between giggles, she continued, Wait, let me get this straight. Did he steal a fake card? The one connected to the identification of fraud?" "Exactly," I answered in a composed and contented tone. He probably had no idea what he was doing. He likely believed he was being witty. "Astute," Chloe uttered. "He is a fool. He will be flagged for each charge he makes. Have you heard from the authorities yet?" "Not yet, but it will happen eventually." I remained silent for the remainder of the week, awaiting Ethan's reaction. A few days later, he left a message on the counter. "I'm taking a little break. Avoid waiting up." That meant exactly what I knew. He was living overseas with the money I had taken. I saw the fraud notifications come in every night. 5-star hotels, upscale dining establishments, and lavish shopping excursions. Every notification was a minor triumph. Agent Keller, a federal investigator assigned to the case, called me 3 days into his rampage. "According to him, we have discovered serious fraudulent activity connected to your account. Do you know who could be in charge?" "Yes," I said without thinking. "My spouse." There was a moment's silence. "Your husband?" I described the circumstances, indicating that the card was a component of a cybersecurity initiative. Agent Keller whistled softly. He remarked, That's a new one. You'll have to submit an official statement, but he's in big trouble based on what we've already flagged." A week of indulgence had swelled Ethan's ego by the time he went back through the door. I was prepared. Wearing the loot from his robbery, he walked into the living room as if nothing had occurred. He grinned arrogantly and said, "Thanks for the upgrade. This time you truly exceeded yourself." The laughing that escaped me was uncontrollable. Ethan scowled, obviously anticipating my rage. "What's so funny?" he inquired sharply. I shook my head and replied, "Oh, Ethan, you will soon discover." With a smug thump, Ethan let his fancy duffel bag fall to the ground. "But really, Sarah," he continued, tossing his fitted jacket over the couch and shrugging it off, "long ago you ought to have informed me about that card. Just think of all the fun we could have had." "Yeah," I folded my arms and leaned on the kitchen counter. "What specific outcome did you anticipate from this?" He kicked off his shoes and grinned. "You're so tight about money all the time. You couldn't really afford it. I assumed that once you realized how happy it made me, you would go on." If it weren't so pitiful, his sheer insolence would have been annoying. Knowing that every second he spent boasting was another nail in his coffin, I suppressed a laugh. "You believed that I had given you the watches, the flights, and the hotels as a gift?" He pointed to himself and added, "Not thought. No, it is time for you to relax." I gave him a tight-lipped smile that conveyed no information. "I'll wager." I grabbed my phone and texted Chloe when Ethan vanished into the shower while singing a loud song. "He is returned. All set to go." She responded right away. "Excellent. Agent Keller will be informed." Agent Keller and Chloe had been working on the case against Ethan for the past week. Every action he took had been monitored, and every charge was painstakingly recorded. His extravagance, from the high-end hotels in Paris to the designer clothes stores, gave the impression that he believed they were untouchable. Ethan was unaware of the extent to which he had buried himself. I was reassured by Agent Keller that a thorough investigation had already been initiated in response to the fraud alarms from the dummy account. During our last call, he had stated, "Once you're ready, we'll bring him in for questioning. However, I would advise letting him enter in by himself. The greater his self-assurance, the better." I had a strange sense of peace now, listening to the echo of Ethan's off-key singing from the bathroom. I had allowed him to exploit my kindness, stability, and trust for years. However, he was going to have to deal with the fallout from underestimating me this time. Ethan slumped onto the couch after emerging, wrapped in a soft towel and smiling as if nothing were bothering him. "You should have seen Paris," he remarked, taking a gleaming gold watch out of his luggage. "The stores and eateries were like something out of a dream." I leaned against the doorway and murmured, "That sounds amazing." "Give me additional details." Exaggerated hand motions and superfluous details about the quality of the champagne at some rooftop bar were all part of his comprehensive recounting of his week-long binge. He didn't even aware he was making a confession, but every word felt like an accusation. I was filming the entire talk on my phone, with the file ready to send to Agent Keller, but he was unaware of it. "What's the best part?" Ethan admired the watch as he held it up. "There was no suspicion, not even you." Chloe and I got together for coffee the following morning to complete the timeline. She scrolled through the information we had gathered and remarked, "He has no defense. Everything is perfect, including the charges, the fraud alerts, and his discussion from last night. He is prepared to be brought in for interrogation by Agent Keller. To carry out the arrest, they are working with the local police." With everything finally beginning to weigh on me, I nodded. "What follows?" "According to Chloe, he will be charged with a number of offenses such as fraud, identity theft, and illegal use of a financial account. It won't be a slap on the wrist because of the sum of money involved. What's best for him? He strikes a compromise and stays out of jail. The worst situation, he might spend years in prison." I had a feeling of sympathy for him. Then I recalled his arrogant smile and how he had displayed his pilfered items without considering the harm he had caused. This wasn't only an error. I had been oblivious to this pattern of entitlement and selfishness for far too long. Later that night, I heard the distinct sound of a knock at the door as Ethan was lounging on the couch and browsing through his phone. My Agent Keller and 2 uniformed officers were standing on the porch when I approached the door and opened it. "Good evening, Ms. Miller," Keller remarked in a kind yet formal tone. "Is Ethan at home?" I moved aside to let them enter and added, "He's right inside. Don't hesitate to become comfortable." Ethan's brows knitted in perplexity as he looked up from his phone. "What's happening?" Sitting up straighter, he asked. The room seemed smaller as Agent Keller walked toward him with a composed authority. "You are being investigated on several charges of credit card fraud and illegal use of financial accounts, Ethan Miller. We want you to accompany us so we can question you." Ethan's confidence vanished in an instant, and his face— "What?" "No, this must be an error," he said, turning to me for assistance. "Tell them this is crazy, Sarah." I tilted my head slightly and crossed my arms. "Ethan, you've been really busy lately, so I'm not sure. Perhaps you ought to tell them." Ethan persisted in protesting as the officers brought him to the door after reading him his rights. "This is not possible. This is a setup, Sarah. Since you're my wife, shouldn't you support me?" I leaned against the doorway and murmured, "Funny. I believed that it was improper for husbands to take from their spouses. I suppose today is a lesson day for both of us." Ethan's bluster gave way to desperation as he looked at me. "This will not go unpunished." I grinned. "I already have, Ethan." There was an uncanny silence in the living room as the officers escorted Ethan out and the door clicked shut. For a moment I remained there and gazed at the vacant spot where he had been standing only moments before. The weight of the situation was causing my heart to race, not dread. He had left, unquestionably gone at last. However, this was not the end. Not quite yet. Chloe called about an hour later. She answered calmly but firmly. "He's with Agent Keller now. They are now interrogating him. Ethan is already attempting to rewrite the facts to his advantage, according to Keller." I answered, rolling my eyes. "Of course he is. I'll guess. Is he acting like the victim?" "You're right," Chloe said, laughing dryly. "He's saying that you allowed him to use the card. Don't worry, though. He has no chance because of the charges, the fraud alerts, and your recording." Agent Keller contacted the following morning to provide an update. "Everything we need is here," he remarked. "Your soon-to-be ex-husband acknowledged using the card, but he maintains that he was unaware that it was linked to a fraud detection program. He's attempting to finger you for the confusion." I answered. "That sounds about right," reclining in my seat. "What follows?" "We are proceeding with the charges," Keller clarified. "He faces several charges of financial account fraud and improper use. He'll face serious repercussions because of the financial stakes. His costly purchases were highlighted by the buyer protection programs, and they are now being repaid. A cent is not your responsibility." I had an enormous and instant comfort. I had been troubled by Ethan's behavior for days, fearing that he had somehow gotten away with it. However, after listening to Keller's assurance, I became fully aware of my triumph. "Thank you for everything," I said. "Don't thank me," said Keller. "We were essentially handed this situation. You did a fantastic job with this." Ethan was more affected by the aftermath than I anticipated. His arrest rapidly became known to our shared friends and acquaintances, and it didn't take long for his meticulously constructed portrayal of the amiable, easygoing husband to fall apart. It seems that Nicole, the lady I assumed he had been dating, broke up with him as soon as she learned of the allegations. The high-end items he had displayed were seized, his scheduled flights were canceled, his accounts were also frozen by the banks. I received a call from an unknown number one evening. I responded against my better judgment, and it was indeed Ethan. "Sarah," he said in a tight, low voice, I must speak with you." I couldn't contain my laughter. "All you have to do, Ethan, is figure out how to give the judge an explanation, please," he murmured, his voice becoming desperate. "All right, I made a mistake. I had no intention of getting this far. I was simply—" "Just what?" I cut in, my voice icy. "Are you merely attempting to defraud me of $50,000? Want to make sure I don't notice? Do you think I'll be too blind or too tolerant to stop you?" The other end of the line was silent for a long time. "I thought you loved me," he mumbled at the end. I exhaled sharply as my rage boiled to the surface. "Yes, Ethan, I did. The person I believed you to be, I loved. But I could never love someone who stole from me, lied to me, and believed he could get away with it." I hung up before he could answer. Chloe contacted a week later to make sure Ethan had agreed to a plea bargain. She clarified that he is escaping jail time. However, he will be required to perform community service and repay all of the money he attempted to take. In addition, his credit will be in ruins for years to come. "That sounds appropriate," I remarked. "He was always looking for the good life. He may now observe the other half's way of life." Chloe chuckled. "Most people wouldn't handle this the way you are." I smiled to myself and remarked, "It's funny. I believed that Ethan was the one keeping our marriage together for years. His charm, ambition, and huge ideas, in my opinion, were what kept us going. I can see it plainly now, though. Everything was being held up by me. All he was dead weight." I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch, gazing around the apartment that now felt entirely and totally mine. On the day the divorce papers arrived, It wasn't a loss without Ethan, it was a gift. An opportunity to start over without the lingering specter of his self-centeredness. While sipping my wine, I reflected on the time he had entered the room, showing off his pilfered items and making fun of me for the alleged improvement he had made to himself. He had been so sure of his own genius, so assured. I felt completely free for the first time in years. This was more than just a marriage ending. It was the start of a life I could at last claim as my own. The days following Ethan's detention were oddly silent in the flat. His belongings were gone. He had packed his fancy duffel bag and sold what little he had left. However, the room felt light. It was almost as if the burden of his treachery had been removed. I was able to sit in my own house for the first time in years without feeling his shadow hanging over me. One afternoon, Chloe came by to deliver some last-minute documents. "How are you doing?" With her typical no-nonsense manner, she asked while seated on the couch. I gave her a cup of coffee and said, "Better than I thought I would. I don't even feel angry anymore, which is weird, but I'm relieved." She gave a knowing smile. "You've already won, so that's why. Sarah, you didn't just make it through this. You emerged more resilient." As we finalized the terms of Ethan's financial restitution and went through the paperwork, I gave that some thought. Though it was comforting to know he would be repaying every dime, it was about getting my independence back at last. I thought it would be easier to maintain harmony if I let Ethan choose the terms of our relationship for years. However, I now understand that silence was not peace, and that peace was based on compromise. A week later, the formal divorce letter arrived in an ordinary envelope that seemed much too little to hold something so significant. After holding it for a while and allowing its weight to settle, I tore it open. Until I located the most important phrase, my eyes skimmed the lines of legalese. Final and unchangeable. With the letter in my hands, I took a seat at the kitchen table and gave myself a rare opportunity to think. When I married Ethan, this was not the life I had envisioned. I had imagined a future based on mutual trust, stability, and partnership. Now, however, I knew I had something greater as I surveyed the house I had made for myself. Clarity, freedom, and the realization that I was stronger than I had ever thought I was. That night, Lauren dropped over with a carton of my favorite takeaway and a bottle of wine. "To fresh starts and the complete dumpster fire you just left behind," she replied, lifting her glass. I clinked my glass against hers and giggled. "Should never accept anything less than what I am worthy of." I began putting my new life together over the course of the following several weeks. In order to make the flat feel more like me, I redecorated it with colorful accents. After years of dreaming, I finally took the solo vacation I had always wanted, exploring the coastline and taking in the tranquility that can only be found when one temporarily leaves everything behind. Through mutual acquaintances, evasive email apologies, and even a ridiculously tone-deaf letter asserting that he had changed, Ethan attempted to get in touch a few more times. However, I didn't answer. Nothing more could be said. I had made my decisions and he had made his. Through the grapevine, I would occasionally learn about new developments in his life. Due to the fraud charges, he was having trouble finding employment. Apparently still holding on to the idea that he could talk his way out of anything, he had returned to live with his parents. I had no sympathy for him. I was relieved, if anything. He was no longer my issue. A month after everything was finalized, I sipped my morning coffee while watching the city below come to life outside my apartment window. The living room was bathed in sunlight, which accentuated the new paint job I had chosen, my favorite shade of blue. It didn't feel like a battlefield anymore. It was familiar. It was tranquil, mine, and full of opportunities. I had long held onto the hope of marriage and starting a family with Ethan. I had disregarded the small voice inside of me that told me something was wrong and that his charm was a front for selfishness. However, I now realized something crucial. It wasn't failure to walk away. It was power. That weekend, Lauren and I went to brunch, which had become a new routine since Ethan left. "So, what's next for you?" she said over waffles and mimosas. I grinned, experiencing the serenity and excitement that had eluded me for so long. To be honest, right now I'm just thinking about myself. My job is doing really well, and I've been considering going on a longer vacation, possibly somewhere peaceful and close to the mountains. She lifted her glass. I prefer to hear that. You're worthy. I felt like I was making decisions only for myself for the first time in years, just the freedom to live my life as I see fit, without any concessions or second-guessing. Even now and then, mutual acquaintances would provide me with updates about Ethan. He was trying to pay back the money he owed while rebuilding his life and bouncing between low-pay jobs. The opulent vacations and fine suits had long since vanished, to be replaced by a brutal reality for which he was unprepared. I didn't think about it. I had made my decisions, and he had made his. He sent me a lengthy, wordy apology via email the last time I heard from him, and it sounded more self-pitying than real. Before discarding it without a response, I read the first few sentences. He didn't have to give me closure. I had already discovered it within myself. I had a glass of wine one evening while sitting on the balcony and thinking back on everything I had experienced: the betrayal, the heartache, the uphill battle to reclaim what was rightfully mine. All of it had led me to this pivotal moment. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't painless. But standing here now, I knew it had all been worth it. The bitterness and anger that had once consumed me? Gone. In their place, an unexpected gratitude had taken root. Ethan's betrayal had forced me to confront my strength, to stop compromising, and to finally prioritize myself. I learned to cherish my independence, to listen to my instincts, and to promise myself that I would never again surrender control over my life to anyone. I stood beneath the night sky, the city lights twinkling in the distance like tiny beacons of hope. With a quiet smile, I raised my glass toward the stars. "Here's to me," I whispered. "Cheers to new beginnings." And with that, I closed the chapter on Ethan for good. No anger, no regret, only the excitement of a future waiting to be written, one I would create on my own terms. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to SoraBook. There's a world of intriguing, heartfelt tales waiting for you in the next videos, so stay tuned for more.